In the world of Persona, a select few individuals possess the power to break free from the chains that bind them and summon what is known as a persona. Even fewer have the ability known as the wild card, allowing them to wield multiple personas at once. Welcome to the Persona Compendium, where we're going to cover the history and symbolism of some of the franchise's most notable shadows, demons, and personas. Today, we're going to have a look at one of the more unique personas only found in Royale, Sumire's Sandrion. For the uninitiated, Sandrion is Sumire's first persona. She appears before Sumire and Joker in Maruki's palace on October 3rd, before we know that Maruki has a palace and that Kasumi is actually Sumire. Once summoned, Sumire undergoes a Sailor Moon-esque unique magical girl transformation and harnesses her spirit of rebellion. But who is Sandrion? Where does her inspiration come from? And perhaps most importantly, why was she chosen to represent the complicated character of Sumire Yoshizawa? To answer these questions, we first must go back in time to one of the oldest and most prominent folktales in all of human history to understand the story of Cinderella and its many, many versions. Now, it should come as no surprise that Cendrillon is based off the classic tale of Cinderella, so it seems natural that the starting point for this persona would begin somewhere around the Brothers Grimm and their collection of dark fairy tales, that would go on to become commodified years after their death by Disney and turned into entertaining children's media. However, the tale of Cinderella actually predates the Brothers Grimm by quite some time. In fact, stories commonly thought to be the progenitors of this classic tale can be traced as far back as ancient Greece, where orators would tell tales of an Egyptian woman losing her sandal to a bird that drops it before the pharaoh. Said pharaoh is then enamored by the strangeness of the occurrence and the appealing shape of the sandal and sends his men to find its owner. Once found, she and the pharaoh are married, and we have what is thought to be one of the earliest known versions of Cinderella's story. Obviously, this tale is a far cry from the Disney classic most of us are familiar with, but this historical basis is of some note here, as it lays the groundwork for subsequent future versions. After years of oral storytelling slightly shifting and morphing the tale as it travels from nation to nation, we start to get something recognizable in the first literary appearance of this tale, written by, and I'm sorry if I butcher this, Jean-Baptiste Basile in 1634. This version of the story would later be recounted in Grimm's fairy tales and become the definitive framework by which the modern story is remembered. Okay, history lesson over, so let's get into the story itself. But before we do that, I just want to say, if you're enjoying the content so far, feel free to subscribe. It's free, and you can always unsub later if you don't like it. Now, Cinderella is the tale of a poor working girl trapped in an abusive family consisting of her two stepsisters and her stepmother, who force her to do all the backbreaking labor needed to run their household. Our protagonist, Ella, like other serfs of the time, is so often covered in black soot and cinders that she is referred to as Cinderella, a play on, well, Cinder and Ella. I guess comedy was easier back then. Anyways, one fateful night, this all changes when a fairy godmother grants her wish to attend the prince's ball on the condition that she returns before midnight. Ella agrees, and her dirty, damaged clothes and soot-covered skin are transformed into a beautiful and clean ball gown befitting of any noblewoman of the time. At the ball, she loses track of time while dancing with the prince and stays longer than intended, forcing her to flee so the prince won't see her true appearance. In her attempt to make it home in time, one of her characteristic glass slippers falls off, leaving behind a single trace for the prince to follow should he want to meet her again. And meet her again he does. After the ball, the prince wants to find the woman with whom he danced, and so he travels from home to home looking for the girl whose foot fits the slipper. Eventually, he finds Ella, and when she produces the second matching slipper, they are married and live happily ever after. This story, as it stands, already carries a few parallels to Sumire, but let's look at Cendrillon's design before we get too deep into things. Cendrillon is characterized by many of the traits given to Ella in the classic folktale. Her clothes are light blue adorned with gold accents. Now, aside from the fact that blue is a calming and soothing color fitting for Ella's personality, this is likely inspired by the Cinderella scene in Disney's classic interpretation of the story. In Disney's repository, Cinderella is almost always seen wearing blue. Seeing as this is by far the most well-known version of Ella, this is a strong way to connect the persona to its historical inspiration. We also see her sporting the classic bright blonde hair, also commonly associated with Cinderella. Unlike the blue, however, there are many historical artworks depicting non-Disney versions of the character with golden blonde hair. I suspect that the gold on her outfit is meant to complement this hair color and reinforce her design visually, but it also plays nicely as another symbol of general heroism and goodwill. In terms of clothing and aesthetic, her outfit is a lovely and decorative decadent suit of glass. All of the blue parts on her body shimmer and shine like a beautiful crystal. I believe this to be a reference to the famous glass slippers seen in the classic folktale. The overall high-class design of Cendrillon's outfit is likely inspired by Cinderella's transformation into a beautiful and classy dress fit for a ball with the prince. Lastly, and perhaps most interestingly, we see that this persona has jet black skin. Side note, do personas even have skin? What would you call that? Anyways, please bear with me here, as I don't think this has anything to do with race in any way, shape, or form, but rather this may be a clever reference to the fact that in the classic folktales, Ella was called Cinderella because her skin was commonly coated in that black soot from sleeping next to the fireplace at night to keep warm. I think the decision to give Sandrion this dark black skin is likely a callback to this detail, and it works wonderfully, both aesthetically and thematically. Altogether, this design is extremely reminiscent of Cinderella's post-transformation look, and this can be our first clue to exactly what the writers were trying to do by linking Sumire and Cinderella's stories. Now, after the history lesson and the brief overview on the tale of Cinderella, I really don't have time to detail Sumire's story front to back, so I'm going to assume that if you're watching this video with the spoiler warning at the top, then you already know what happens. If you don't remember, I'll pause really quick while you go and watch some cutscenes reposted on YouTube. Okay, everyone back? Great, let's get into it. Sumire's arc in Persona 5 Royale can largely be seen as a darker modern interpretation of Cinderella flipped on its head. To explore this, we need to look at Sumire's life before the accident with the real Kasumi. Sumire is a complicated character, weighed down by serious bouts with depression and an inferiority complex birthed from the shadow of her sister ever looming over her. All of these painful emotions are amplified tenfold when Kasumi is killed, saving Sumire. In addition to her already serious depression and self-doubt, she now faces survivor's guilt, blaming herself for the death of her more successful sister. Covered in the emotional soot of her trauma, she is unable to find a way forward in life without her sister, and feels as though she robbed Kasumi of her potential and her dreams. At this point, Sumire wishes for nothing more than to take Kasumi's place in life, but as any reasonable person knows, that is nothing more than an unrealistic escapist fantasy. This all changes, however, when Dr. Maruki, a man with the power to change reality, removes that dark emotional cloud and allows her to live as Kasumi. Dr. Maruki in this rendition is of course the fairy godmother, allowing Sumire, our version of Ella, to indulge in her escapist fantasy of living as Kasumi. In much the same way the fairy godmother let Ella indulge in her escapist fantasy of going to the prince's ball. However, just as Cinderella's transformation can only last until midnight, it's obvious that Sumire cannot live the rest of her life as Kasumi. Myriad practical reasons aside, living your life as someone who you are not can never and will never end well. This all comes to a roaring boil when Akechi and Joker face off against Sumire under Maruki's control. This boss fight is the turning point where in the original story, Cinderella loses her slipper. After the fight, with Joker's help and to a lesser degree the rest of the Phantom Thieves, Sumire begins to slowly dig her way out of the fantasy she had lived for too long. Joker here can then be seen as her prince because he sees Sumire for who she really is instead of Kasumi and still accepts her, in much the same way that the prince accepted Cinderella as just Ella. This retelling of Cinderella in Persona 5 Royale is really interesting, and I have to admit, it was not something that I picked up on naturally. Unlike Akechi and Maruki, whose symbolism and backstory just came naturally to me, it took me quite some time to figure out exactly what was going on with Sumire, but the genius symbolism found in her persona began to point me in the right direction. Each little thing I found led me closer to understanding Sumire as a character and the themes that she represents. I think this experience is more than telling about the genius symbolism found in Sandrion, and with this newfound understanding, I can't wait to dive further into Sumire as a character in the future. The excellent inversion of the classic fairy tale is a great way to criticize and dissect escapism in media and in real life, and strengthens the themes already present in the game. These small details are really what makes a persona for me. These details in a persona not only reflect their owner, but allow the player to dive deeper into the themes and ideas core to the character, and for those reasons, I think Sandrion is an excellent persona. Hey, thanks for making it to the end of the video. If you made it this far, then you probably liked what I had to say. So if that's the case, be sure to leave me a like so I know I'm doing something right. Be sure to leave me a comment below on what characters, themes, and personas you guys want me to cover next time. Also, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an upload. Best of all, it's free and you can always change your mind later if it doesn't work out. No hard feelings. Finally, I also have a Twitter and an Instagram if you would like to hit me up on either of those platforms. Links to those will be below. But with all that YouTube stuff out of the way, I just want to say thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time.